They say the earth remembers what men try to forget. And in the heart of Louisiana's cane country, where the air trembles with heat and the ground drinks deeply of rain and blood alike, there stands a ruin they call Maison du Sang, the House of Blood. No one lives there now. No one dares. The sugarcane still grows tall around it, whispering like a congregation of ghosts when the wind passes through. But if you walk near its fields at night, you'll hear something else, a hollow sound beneath the soil, like breathing that never quite stops. That is where it began, and where it ended. In the summer of 1842, when the river ran low and the air was thick enough to choke, Mistress Eveline Dufresne ruled over her plantation like a queen of salt and ash. Her husband, Auguste Dufresne, had died the year before, thrown from his horse and crushed beneath the hooves of his own carriage team. The parish priest said it was an accident. The slaves whispered it was punishment. Eveline said nothing. She simply put on her mourning black, locked herself in her chambers for 7 days, and when she emerged, she was changed. The old servant said her eyes had gone strange, not mad exactly, but empty, as though her soul had been wrung dry and what remained was something colder. Eveline Dufresne was not born cruel. She had once been a girl of delicate voice and gentleness, raised on prayers and piano hymns in New Orleans, but grief, as it often does, had opened a door inside her that should never have been touched, and through that door something else had stepped in. In those years, Louisiana was a kingdom of rot and sugar. The fields stretched for miles, bright and choking, their sweetness masking the stench of toil and death beneath them. The Dufresne plantation was among the largest, its profits resting on the backs of hundreds of enslaved men and women who harvested under the eye of a woman who no longer saw them as living things. Eveline moved through her house like a spirit, all black lace and silence, speaking little, eating less. The overseers learned quickly to avoid her gaze. She would wander into the fields at dusk barefoot, trailing her fingers through the cane, whispering the Lord's Prayer in French, over and over again until even the cicadas grew silent. They said she could hear her husband's voice in the rustle of the stalks. They said he called her by name. Her favorite place was the small graveyard behind the house. There, under cypress trees dripping with moss, lay generations of Dufresnes. And a little farther back, unmarked graves where the slaves were buried 3 or 4 to a pit. Eveline began tending both. She replaced the flowers, scrubbed the crosses clean, and ordered new stones for the faithful servants whose names she did not know. The priest found it strange, but he said nothing. He was grateful she had returned to Mass at all, but there was something in her prayers that unsettled him. Her words trembled, not from devotion, but from a kind of hunger, as if she believed the dead could hear her, and worse, could answer. That summer the plantation was struck by a drought. The cane turned yellow, the wells grew shallow, and tempers grew hot. The workers whispered that the mistress had brought a curse upon them. They said she had struck a bargain with the spirits buried beneath the soil, that every lash of her whip was an offering, and every punishment a tithe. Then one morning, a young girl named Mariette went missing. She had been seen last at dusk, carrying water to the mistress's parlor. When the others asked Eveline where the girl had gone, she replied almost absently, "She disobeyed me." And that was all she said. By nightfall, the whispers had become hysteria. They said Mariette had been buried alive in the cane fields, that the mistress had done it herself with her bare hands. The overseers searched for hours, but found nothing. No grave, no body. Only a patch of earth newly turned, still soft, with the faint scent of rosewater and decay. When the priest came to question her, Eveline smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just the faint, unsettling smile of someone who no longer believes she can be judged by men. "I have given her back to the Lord," she said softly. "She was defiant in life. She will be obedient in death." The priest left her house trembling, but as he rode away, he thought he heard singing behind him, a woman's voice, low and mournful, echoing from the cane. And beneath it, he swore he heard a second voice, muffled, distant, crying for air. After Mariette, more disappearances followed. One by one, those who angered Eveline were simply gone. A field hand accused of theft, a maid who spoke out of turn, a man who tried to run. Always the same story. No bodies, only earth that looked as though it had been disturbed, the cane bending slightly inward, as if in mourning. The remaining workers began to refuse to enter the fields after dusk. Some fled in the night, vanishing into the swamps. Others prayed and crossed themselves, whispering that the mistress had gone mad, or worse, that she had become something unholy. Eveline, meanwhile, began to speak often of order. To her, the plantation was a body, and every act of disobedience a disease. She saw herself not as its ruler, but its physician. Her punishments were her cures. She took to reading aloud from her husband's old Bible during meals, her voice shaking as she recited verses about obedience, sin, and the wages of rebellion. Then she began keeping a journal, long pages of tight, fevered script, recording each servant's name, each fault and each burial, as though she were a confessor writing down the sins of her flock. By late August, she wrote only one phrase over and over again: "The soil remembers. The soil redeems." At night the house came alive with sounds. The walls creaked. The bells in the chapel rang without wind. Servants said they heard footsteps on the veranda, slow, dragging, like someone walking barefoot across wet boards. One girl claimed she saw Mistress Eveline in the fields after midnight, kneeling over the earth, whispering to it. Her fingers sunk deep into the soil as though she were feeding it something unseen. When asked what she was doing, Eveline turned and said only, "They are still breathing." By September, the drought broke. Rain fell for 3 days and nights. The cane began to rise again, thick and green. And though the workers whispered of curses and graves, the mistress smiled for the first time in months. "The Lord provides," she said, her voice soft and distant. But when the overseers went to harvest the first field, they found something buried beneath the roots, something pale and twisted. Clutching a rosary made of bone, the priest returned once more, this time to bless the land. But when he scattered holy water across the soil, the ground began to bubble, black, oily and stinking of rot. He fled that night and never returned. The Dufresne plantation was abandoned within the year. Those who remained said the mistress herself had vanished, gone walking into the cane fields one night and never come out. But sometimes, in the deepest part of summer, when the wind runs low and the earth smells like rain, travelers say you can still hear her voice drifting through the sugar fields, calling each of their names one by one, and if you stay long enough, the earth will whisper yours back. They dug until their hands bled. The soil was soft, swollen with the new rain, heavy as flesh. Each shovelful let out a wet sigh, as if the earth itself were breathing against the iron. The overseer, Jonas Bell, wiped his brow and spat into the mud. He'd been hired after the last man disappeared, took the job cheap, too desperate to ask why no one else would. But even he felt the wrongness of that field. Something sweet hung in the air, sweeter than sugar, a cloying rot that made the lungs tighten. He could taste it, thick and metallic at the back of his throat. "Keep digging," he muttered. "We'll burn what's left." He didn't say what it was. None of them wanted to. At the top of the hill, Mistress Eveline watched them work. Her black veil hung low over her face, her gloved hands folded around a parasol she never opened. Behind her, the manor's silhouette trembled in the heat, white walls stained with mildew, its windows black as eyes. Jonas glanced up once and saw her lips moving. Praying, he thought, but then he realized she wasn't speaking words. It was more like a humming, a low melody that vibrated through the ground. The same tune she'd been singing for weeks now, the same one they heard echoing through the house at night. The men called it the burial song. No one dared hum it back. That evening, when the work was done, they found the first hand. It wasn't buried deep, only an inch or two beneath the cane roots. The fingers curled tight as though clutching something. Pale, bloated, stripped of its nails. Jonas gagged and shouted for the others to stop. But the mistress did not flinch. She knelt, brushed the dirt from the knuckles and smiled faintly, as if recognizing an old friend. "She is at peace," Evelyn whispered. "Do not disturb her rest." "Ma'am," Jonas stammered, "there's more down there. God help me, there's more." The mistress rose to her full height. Her voice was cold as iron. "Then cover them, quickly, before they wake." That night the men left the field unharvested. But the sound of digging continued, slow, steady, rhythmic, long after they had fled to the quarters. From the veranda, Evelyn watched the fields move in the dark. Every so often the soil would ripple as though stirred from below, and a faint whisper would rise on the wind. Not words, but a sighing chorus, hundreds of voices breathing in unison. She closed her eyes and smiled. "The soil remembers," she murmured. "The soil redeems." Before her husband's death, Eveline had been devout, every Sunday in Mass, every evening in prayer. But grief had turned her faith inside out. Where she once saw salvation, she now saw symmetry. In her journal she wrote, "The Lord buries his seeds to make them grow. Why should I not do the same?" She began holding vigils in the family chapel, not for the living, but for those she had returned to the earth. The servants would hear her chanting through the night, lighting candles for each soul she'd taken, whispering their names into the floorboards until the wax melted into pools of red. Sometimes, they said, the candles burned blue. Sometimes they burned upside down. Her madness grew quiet, refined, ritualized. She demanded confessions from every worker on the estate. They were forced to kneel before her, confess their faults, and beg forgiveness, not from God, but from her. If their repentance satisfied her, she marked their foreheads with ash. If it did not, she wrote their names in her ledger. Those names never lasted long. By week's end, they were gone. One evening, Jonas Bell found the ledger. He'd been ordered to fetch the mistress's lamp oil, and as he entered her study, the journal lay open on the desk, lines of dense script, written in ink that had turned brown with age and something darker. Each page began with a name. Each ended with a date and a single word, buried. But the strangest thing, beneath each entry, pressed into the paper, were faint indentations, like fingernail marks. As he turned the pages, a single drop of moisture slid down the margin. It was warm. He slammed the book shut. That night the air turned heavy again, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Jonas tried to sleep, but something kept tapping against the window. Not the wind, not rain. Something softer. He rose and peered out. The cane fields glistened under moonlight, slick with mist. And there, just at the edge of the clearing, and he saw shapes moving, pale hands. Dozens of them. They clawed through the soil, slow and trembling, as if remembering how to move after too long underground. Jonas stumbled back, choking on bile. He ran to the door, but stopped when he heard a woman's voice outside, clear, low, and terribly calm. "Do not fear them," Evelyn said. "They only want to be heard." He opened the door and saw her standing barefoot in the mud, her nightdress soaked through, her hair unbound. In one hand she held a spade, in the other a candle still burning despite the rain. Around her the ground seethed, small mounds shifting, fingers twitching through the muck. "They are not dead," she said. "They are only waiting." By morning the fields were silent again, but from that day on, no one went near them. The overseers fled. The servants prayed, and Mistress Eveline began walking the fields alone, whispering names as she passed each patch of earth, as if counting her children. The journal grew thicker, the handwriting wilder. "I have given them silence, and they have given me peace. The Lord has no mercy, so I shall give it instead. Each breath I take is borrowed from the earth below." In late autumn, a letter arrived from New Orleans, her brother, begging her to leave the plantation. Rumors had reached the city, graves dug up, servants missing, strange lights seen at night. Eveline burned the letter unread. That same evening, thunder rolled over the bayou. The sky split open. Rain fell for 6 nights straight. When it finally stopped, the overseers returned to find the house flooded to the knees and the fields a mire of black sludge. Everywhere, bones. Hundreds of them. The storm had turned the land inside out. washing the buried to the surface, tangled arms, skulls with mouths open mid-scream, rosaries hanging from sockets like tears, and at the center of it all, standing waist-deep in the muck, was the mistress. Her eyes were wide, her hands clawing through the remains as if searching for something precious. When she saw the men, she whispered, "They spoke to me. They forgave me." Then she lifted her arms to the heavens and screamed, not in horror, in triumph. That was the last anyone saw of Eveline Dufresne alive. The next morning her house was empty, her journal open on the dining table, her black veil folded neatly beside it. But when they searched the fields one final time, they found a fresh mound of earth near the family graveyard. At its center, a single footprint, bare, and beneath it, a heartbeat, faint, slow, still alive. This was part 2, the hands beneath the soil. Next, part 3, the ledger of the damned. When the parish sheriff finally came to the Dufresne estate, he found the front gates open. No guards, no overseers. Just the sound of flies thick as rain. The house smelled like rust and orchids, sweet, wet, and suffocating. The air inside clung to his skin like breath. He called out once, "Mrs. Dufresne?" No answer. Only the echo of water dripping somewhere far within. Steady as a clock, counting down, he moved room to room, boots sinking into warped boards. Walls lined with portraits whose faces had all been slashed with a knife. Each painting had been defaced the same way. Eyes gouged out, mouths sewn shut with black thread, and above every fireplace written in charcoal were the same words, "The soil remembers." The sheriff's name was Thomas Baird. He'd fought in Florida once, seen men die in swamps and vanish in the mud. But nothing there had unsettled him the way this place did. It wasn't just death. It was presence, the feeling that something was waiting, something patient, something listening. In the study, he found the ledger, the infamous book that the men had whispered about before they fled. It was bound in dark calfskin, edges warped from damp. He set it down on the desk, lit a match, and began to read. Each page began the same way, in the year of our Lord, 1842. Followed by a name, a sin, and a date of burial. Mariette spoke blasphemy, returned June 17th. Isaac struck his master, returned July 2nd. Aline stole bread, returned August 9th, every line precise, written in a hand both elegant and fevered. But as he read further, the handwriting began to change. The script grew frantic, the ink uneven, letters carved so deep they cut through the paper itself. Then the names stopped, and in their place a new kind of entry began. They speak to me now. They forgive. The earth has taken me in. I am not buried yet. At the very end of the ledger he found a loose scrap of parchment, folded tight as a prayer. When he opened it, he saw only 2 words, written in a shaking, childlike scrawl, "Dig deeper," and below them, a faint handprint, small, pale, pressed in what might have been blood. Outside the air had grown heavy again. Cane rustled without wind, and from the fields came that sound, the one the men had spoken of in their reports, the soft, sucking rhythm of something moving beneath the ground. He stepped to the veranda. The landscape stretched out before him, green and gold and sick with humidity, but he could see them, shapes in the cane, figures hunched and shifting, swaying as though tethered to the earth itself. He raised his rifle, and then one of them lifted its head. Its mouth opened, wider than human, and a sound poured out, low and unending, not a scream but a single, sustained note of breathing, the same breath he had heard in the house. Thomas Baird ran. He didn't remember crossing the field, only the wet slap of mud against his boots and the heartbeat that wasn't his own pounding beneath the ground. He reached the chapel. Its door hung open, the crucifix inside turned upside down. The pews were gone, replaced by rows of shallow pits filled with water, baptisms of mud. And floating in the center, face up and pale as paper, was Eveline Dufresne, or what was left of her. Her eyes were open. Her mouth too, but no sound came. The skin around her neck was black with rot, yet her body had not decayed. She looked almost peaceful, as if merely resting beneath the rainlight that filtered through the holes in the roof. At her chest lay the ledger. Clutched tight, Baird stepped closer, and as he reached for the book, her fingers tightened. He froze. For a moment he swore he saw her lips move, forming words, faint and broken, like bubbles rising through water. He leaned down, and then he heard it. The soil remembers. He stumbled back, firing once. The gunshot cracked through the chapel, echoing across the bayou. The body did not move. But something else did. The ground beneath her rippled, first a tremor, then a surge. Water turned black, thick, churning as dozens of hands broke the surface, reaching, clawing, pulling. They rose one by one, the buried, the punished, the redeemed. Their eyes shone white, mouths full of earth, moving not with rage but with terrible, childlike obedience. And all the while, the corpse of Eveline Dufresne smiled. The sheriff fled the chapel. He made it halfway to the gates before he felt the ground soften beneath him, mud gripping his boots, sucking him downward. He fired again. The echo died before it reached the trees. The cane began to bend around him, closing like fingers. He screamed for help, clawing toward the road, but the soil was alive, breathing, pulsing, tightening. When his deputy found his body the next morning, he was buried up to the chest, eyes open, lips parted as though in prayer, and beneath his fingernails, packed tight, was black soil. The parish priest refused to bless the land. He said it was no longer earth but flesh, consecrated not by God but by sin. The plantation was condemned, the house left to rot. Within months the bayou swallowed it. Cane overtook the fences, the river changed its course, and the road to Maison du Sang vanished from every map. But the ledger did not burn. When a storm in 1861 unearthed part of the old chapel, a boy from town found the book half buried in the mud. Its pages were dry, its ink still bright. He carried it home. That night his mother woke to the sound of whispering, her son's voice low and strange, speaking in a woman's tone. When she entered his room, the ledger was open beside him, and from the corner of the room the earth beneath the floorboards pulsed, once, twice, in rhythm with his breath. The next morning the boy was gone. The book remained, open to a new page. Thomas Baird, Disobedient, returned. That ledger passed from hand to hand over the decades. Preachers, historians, thrill-seekers. Every owner claimed to hear voices after nightfall. Some dreamed of a woman's face beneath the soil. Some dug holes in their gardens without knowing why, and always the same entry appeared overnight, a new name. Written in that same dark ink, no one ever saw it written. But the handwriting never changed. They say the ledger is still out there, kept in a locked chest somewhere in the deep parishes. And sometimes, when the air grows hot and the ground softens before the rain, you can hear pages turning by themselves, one for every name the earth remembers, one for every hand still reaching upward. By late August, the plantation smelled of iron and swamp decay. The sugarcane fields that once shimmered gold now drooped in a strange pallor, as though the soil itself had grown sick from the sins buried within it. The overseer, Baptiste, refused to return after sundown. Even the hounds would not go near the magnolia grove where Elodie had ordered the pits dug. And in the main house, her servants, those few who still remained, moved like ghosts, speaking only in whispers, their eyes drawn to the floorboards as if something were crawling beneath them. Elodie Duvernay had stopped sleeping. At first she blamed the fever that had taken her husband, then the Louisiana heat, then the incessant croaking of frogs in the stagnant pond outside her window. But it was not sound that kept her awake, it was movement. She felt it beneath her bed at night. A subtle rhythmic pressure, like someone pacing slowly under the floorboards. At first she thought it rats. Then she remembered how she'd ordered the pits to be sealed with lime, how the bodies had been packed tight into the wet earth, their cries muffled beneath layers of clay and magnolia roots. Now the wood shifted like breath. One night, she woke to the faint sound of a woman humming. It came from under the floor. The tune was an old Creole lullaby, one the housemaids used to sing when her son was still alive. Elodie froze. The sound grew clearer, the rise and fall of a soft, motherly voice. But her son, Lucien, had drowned 2 years ago. Her heart thundered as she pressed her ear to the floorboards. The humming stopped. A single knock echoed from below, 3 times. She fled to the parlor, barefoot, her nightdress clinging to her in sweat. The portraits of her ancestors seemed to lean forward in the flicker of candlelight, their painted eyes black with judgment. "You will not take me," she whispered to the empty room. "I gave you obedience. I gave you silence. I buried what was mine to bury." But something in the house disagreed. The next morning, Baptiste returned briefly to deliver supplies. He found Elodie standing on the veranda, staring into the magnolia grove. Her hair was loose, her eyes rimmed with red, and her hands trembled as if she'd been clawing at something all night. "You've dug enough graves, madame," Baptiste said cautiously. "The land won't bear more." She turned to him with a brittle smile. "The land is mine. It bears what I tell it to." He did not argue, but as he left, he made the sign of the cross and spat twice over his shoulder. That night, the frogs went silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The clock struck midnight when Elodie descended the stairs, holding a candle in one hand and her late husband's pistol in the other. She moved toward the parlor, guided by the faintest sound, a low, wet dragging, like a body being pulled through mud. It came from beneath the floor again, her pulse thundered. She dropped to her knees, pressing her ear against the boards. This time it wasn't humming, it was breathing, shallow, labored, real. She whispered, "Who's there?" The breath hitched. Then a voice, hoarse and trembling, answered from the dark. "Ma'am, you left us. We're still down here." Her candle flickered violently. "No," she hissed. "No, you're dead." The board shuddered. Dust fell from the rafters. "Not all of us," the voice whispered. "Some of us still waiting to be buried, right?" Elodie screamed and stumbled backward. The candle fell, its flame licking the hem of her dress. She smothered it with her hands, shaking, eyes wild. The house groaned, a deep, settling sound that rolled through the walls like thunder. By dawn, the house had shifted. The parlor floor sagged, as though something had tunneled beneath it. The servants refused to enter, claiming they smelled rot and heard crying through the walls. Elodie ordered them to stay. None obeyed. By nightfall, she was alone. She lit every candle in the house, but the light did nothing against the darkness seeping up from the ground. The portrait seemed to weep oil. The wallpaper bulged as if something crawled behind it, and then came the tapping again. Not one voice this time, many. A rhythm of knuckles striking wood, like 100 desperate hands calling from the other side of the floor. "Let us out. Let us out. Let us out." She clutched the pistol and screamed, "You were punished for your sins, for disobedience." The knocking stopped. Then slowly from deep within the earth came a woman's voice, clear, defiant, unmistakable. "We only obeyed you." The air thickened. The candles dimmed. Outside, the magnolia grove swayed through. There was no wind. The ground around it pulsed faintly, as though the earth itself had a heartbeat. Elodie staggered to the veranda, eyes wide, watching as small cracks opened across the soil. A smell of iron and clay rose up. Then something broke the surface, fingers, pale, swollen, slick with mud. Another followed, then another. She dropped the pistol. From the ground, the buried began to emerge, not whole, but twisted, their limbs bound by the roots that had grown through them. Their mouths gaped soundlessly, but their eyes, God, their eyes burned with terrible lucidity. Elodie stumbled backward into the house, slamming the door. She could hear them dragging themselves toward the veranda, nails scraping wood. She locked herself in the parlor and pressed her back against the door. The floorboards beneath her bulged upward. By morning, the house was silent again. The sun rose pale and weak through the swamp mist. A pair of travelers passing the property later swore they saw no movement, only the magnolia trees trembling softly, their roots dark with fresh soil. Inside, the parlor door hung open. The pistol lay on the floor, rusted through. The portraits were gone, every frame empty, as though the painted souls had fled the house entirely. And where the floor had once been, there was only a yawning pit. the scent of damp clay rising from below. At the edge of that pit lay a woman's lace handkerchief embroidered with the initials ED. When the parish sheriff came riding through the Duvernay plantation 3 days later, he found no trace of life. The sugar fields stood waist-high in stagnant water, their stalks bent and blackened by rot. The crows had gathered along the roofline of the mansion, hundreds of them, silent and still, like mourners dressed in feathers. The doors were open. The house itself sagged toward the swamp, as though drawn down by some invisible weight. Sheriff Leclerc called out but heard no answer. He stepped inside, his boots sinking into damp floorboards that creaked beneath his weight. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and something sweetly decayed, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. He found the parlor first. The pit was there, wide and deep, where the heart of the house had been. At its bottom, magnolia roots twisted like serpents, glistening with moisture. The sheriff leaned close, raising his lantern. Something pale gleamed in the dark. Fabric. Lace. When he reached down to lift it with his cane, the cloth disintegrated into ash. The locals whispered about what happened in that house long before the sheriff's arrival. They said Mistress Elodie had called down her own punishment, that the dead she buried had not lain still. Some claimed to see her figure wandering the grove at night, her white gown streaked with mud, her mouth full of soil. Others swore they heard music, a slow, sorrowful tune, drifting from beneath the magnolias like the hymn of a congregation buried alive. But the truth of what became of her was found in the diaries left behind. They were discovered days later, half burned in the upstairs bedroom. The last entry was dated August 28, 1842. It read, "The earth is breathing. I hear them in the roots. They forgive nothing. Every command I gave, they took it with them, and now they speak it back through the ground. I am their mistress no longer. The house belongs to them." The sheriff ordered the grounds sealed. The remaining servants left that same night, walking barefoot down the levee road never to return, and yet the land would not rest. Weeks later, the cane fields began to sprout again, not in neat rows but in wild, tangled patterns. Their growth was unnatural, too fast, too thick. At the center of the property, where the parlor once stood, a single magnolia tree had grown, enormous and luminous, its blossoms white as bone. Locals said it bloomed only under moonlight, and that the wind that moved through its branches carried voices. Some nights, the singing could be heard all the way across the bayou, soft, rhythmic, like women working in unison. Each verse ended the same way, a low, dragging sound, as if someone were still digging from below. In 1870, a traveling priest visited the site, believing he could cleanse it. He found the house half swallowed by vines, the windows like empty eye sockets. He built a fire in the parlor's ruins and began to recite prayers in Latin. But before dawn, the townsfolk heard him screaming. They found no trace of his body, only his rosary, twisted around the roots of the magnolia tree. Those who dared to dig found the soil still soft, and beneath it, bones. Not just those of the enslaved, but others too. Men, women, perhaps travelers, all bound in the same way. Their hands turned upward, as if they'd tried to crawl out. In the middle of them lay a woman's skeleton in the remains of a torn silk gown. Her bones were fused with the roots of the tree, as though she'd been claimed by it entirely. Around her neck hung a locket containing a single word engraved in gold: Elodie. The plantation was never rebuilt. By the turn of the century, it was little more than a rumor, a cursed stretch of swamp that hunters avoided and travelers crossed themselves near. But on the anniversary of the storm that drowned the Duvernay house, the magnolia tree would bloom again, and with it came the cries, not screams but something older, a sound like women singing work songs in the distance, a rhythm like shovels striking wet clay. And if you followed the sound, if you stood close enough to the tree, you could hear what they were saying beneath the hymn. We buried her too. She sleeps where we slept. The roots remember. Modern historians still debate whether Elodie Duvernay ever truly existed. Some records place her among the wealthiest widows in St. Martin Parish. Others suggest she was nothing more than folklore, a tale to frighten children away from trespassing on old plantation ruins. But in 1992, a team of restoration workers surveying the swamp unearthed a rusted pistol, a fragment of lace, and a single gold locket engraved with the same name found in the diaries, Elodie D. The items were sealed and stored at the Louisiana Historical Archive in Baton Rouge. Since then, the staff report an unending problem. The box holding the locket never stays closed. Each morning it's found slightly ajar. And on humid nights, the archivists say they smell magnolia flowers, even though the room is windowless. And the nearest tree is miles away, and so ends the tale of the plantation mistress who buried her servants alive for disobedience, Louisiana, 1842. In the end, the land took back everything she had buried, and gave her to the roots that remembered her cruelty. If you listen closely on Louisiana nights, they say you can still hear the shovels in the mud and the whisper of her name beneath the magnolias. This was Liturgy of Dread. If you found your way here, you are meant to, until the next haunting, sleep carefully.